Before we get started, all right, we're starting the recording of our session. And I think you're all here, and we may have a few other folks joining us shortly, but we'll just get started for now, and maybe we'll have a few more people come on. So welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. My name's Darlene O'Leary, and I am coordinator of Martha Justice Ministry with the Sisters of St. Martha and Antigonish, Mi'kma'ki. And I'm also the current chair of Joint Ecological Ministries, and what a wonderful crew that is to work with. You know them all, I'm sure. So we're here today to have our debriefing session from our wonderful learning and lobbying opportunity that we had in May. So in May we had what was called Learning and Lobbying, New Wine and New Wineskins. And we took that chance to have some sessions together with folks from religious congregations and others to talk about some of our lobbying efforts, some of our policy priorities, and where we want to go from there. So we did that over a couple of days of sessions in a See, Discern, Act framework. So we started, I'll just do a little discussion about that framework, but I'm going to get us started, and we're still coming in here, so feel free to just hop on in. We'll just get started with a few technical recommendations. So as we go along, if you're not speaking, it's always best to stay muted just in case there's background noise. So thank you for doing that. Also, we'll soon be starting off with, I'll provide you with a land acknowledgement, and we'll have an opening prayer, and then we'll be led by Genevieve Gallant through the sessions today, and we'll take about an hour and a half of your time today. So thanks for being with us. And so let me just start off by leading you with the land acknowledgement. So we begin our gathering together acknowledging that we are, each of us, on Indigenous territory. So I am located in Mi'kma'ki, which is the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The land was covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. So we know that the treaties have not been honored by settlers, and that the legacy of colonialism is still being felt to this day. So we really invite you to take time today to reflect on what it means to be treaty people, and on the ways we can deepen our relationships as we walk the path of reconciliation. We hope that this gathering will honor the importance of Indigenous sovereignty as we, in our own ways and in our communities, work for justice, truth, and reconciliation with Indigenous communities. So please feel free to share in the chat the Indigenous territory where you are located. And welcome. So just to get us started, as I was saying, the framework of our learning and lobbying, New Wine and New Wineskins opportunities was a See, Discern, Act kind of framework. So we started off on May 15th with 2 online sessions. So the first was an opportunity to have a panel discussion. We named it the See, the Problem of Climate Change in the Context of Canadian Public Policy. And we heard from Hadrian Mertens Kirkwood, the senior researcher with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And we also heard from Caroline Roulette, who is the acting executive director of the Climate Action Network. So that was our first session in the morning on the 15th. Then in the afternoon, we were led by the wonderful Sister Sue Wilson in a session called DISCERN, Levers for Faith Communities Regarding Federal Government Action Toward Ecological Justice. And that was our first session, 2 sessions of See and Discern. And then our next session was in person on May 17th, and that was ACT. What is the focused government action we want to achieve? And that allowed folks to gather together in person to prepare for some lobbying meetings on Parliament Hill with MPs, senators, and other staff folks. So what we're going to talk about today is really focused on that third piece, but it'll bring in the other sessions as well. And we're going to start off now with an opening prayer, and then Genevieve Gallant, who's the Executive Director of the Office of Religious Congregations for Integral Ecology, will lead the rest of the sessions. So Sister Barbara, please go ahead and lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Darlene. So let us remember that we are always held, embraced in the presence of the Creator who loves us profoundly, more than we can imagine, the Creator of the universe who makes us one. Our identity is in being one. So we ponder the greatness of our being, our call, and we picture a tree. Maybe out the window we see trees. Give some carbon dioxide to the trees. Take in oxygen from the trees. You might do that for an hour some afternoon, or just some minutes in walking. And then we know, we experience the land is us. We are. Creator expressing divinity, embracing in the cosmic being, the cosmic divinity, on fire with love. And so with that, we go forward with great trust, claiming our being, our right, our identity, in full gratitude. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pass it on to Genevieve Gallant at this point to lead us in our conversation.
Hi, everybody. Glad you're here with us. So we have a series of questions that we'll grapple with as a group. But before we started, I thought I would tell you a bit about how we set up the MP meetings, and then I'll pass it over to a participant from what we call Team 1 and Team 2, and which will share a bit about the folks that we met with on the Hill. So in our starting phase, we identified a list of who we wanted to meet with. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see what screen I've got. This one. And show you kind of who we were listed. Was my working list. We wanted to meet with ministers of environment and climate change, Minister of Natural Resources, the parliamentary secretaries of the same, as well as members of Liberal, Conservative, Green, Bloc Québécois, MPs who were sitting on the Standing Committee for the Environment, who were opposition critics, or Standing Committee on Natural Resources. We also reached out to a few people in the Senate, notably Senator Rosa Galvez, who's the chair of the Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources. And then two other folks who we had a strong connection with, and that was Minister Philomena Tassi from Southwest Ontario, and Sherry Meyerhofer, who was the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise. So we had kind of a list of 22, and you can see from my colors that I was flipping between who said yes, who said no, and who just didn't reply. So we went from there and managed to gain, let's see if we can pull this over, managed to gain meetings with, I think we were 8 or 9. And that was what we went with. It was a bit of a scheduling chaos the week of to get those meetings in place. But in the end, we were very happy that we were able to have enough meetings for 2 groups to have a full day, or relatively full day on the Hill. This is a little picture of us doing our prep afternoon in Ottawa at St. Paul University. We worked with a handbook to prepare for the day. Sister Sue wanted to make sure that she was at the front of the room. No, she's teasing. She tried really hard to not be at the front of the room, but in this photo, it looks like she's guiding us, and she did guide us through the day, and for that we are grateful. So with that, I'm going to see if I can have Sister Janet say a little something. Nope, not Sister Janet, Sister Sue, say something about their meetings. They met with Minister Philomena Tassi, Elizabeth May, Parliamentary Secretary Julie DeBrusen, MP Peter, whose name I can never properly say, Fragiscatos, and Sherry Meyerhofer. Do you want to say a little something, Sue?
Sure, thanks, Jen. Yeah, so actually we started off the beginning of the day splitting into two groups. So Joan and Deirdre went to talk to Minister Philomena Tassi, while Joe Gunn and I went to talk to the ombudsperson for responsible enterprise. So I'll speak to that meeting. The ombudsperson. It was actually a long meeting, a really good discussion. She was really open to discussing kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the office, and you know, certainly aware that a huge weakness of her office is that she can't demand documents from businesses and she can't compel witnesses. So she saw that as something that will come eventually. So maybe a little more positive there than a lot of folks in the justice world are. But actually her main idea that she would like groups to help her move forward with is to get legislation, to get the office embedded in legislation so that it can't be easily dismissed in the years ahead. So then we went to, all four of us came together again for a meeting with Elizabeth May, who had lots to say, was very animated. In fact, I was kind of facilitating that meeting, and we had another meeting right after. So probably the hardest thing I did that day was to try to get us out of Elizabeth May's office so we could get to the next meeting. But I think the most important takeaway for me from that meeting was that she suggested that we keep our targets ambitious, what we were asking the government to do, but that we go with an even shorter timeline. So we were trying to move the timeline from 2050 to 2040. She suggested going with, what do we need the government to do by 2025? What do we need them to do by 2030? So just to make sure that they're really keeping forward on that timeline. Then we met with Peter Fragiscatos, the MP from London, who was very welcoming and listened, asked good questions. None of this is his portfolio, but he did commit to taking our asks to caucus. So appreciated that. And finally, we met with Julie DeBrusen, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as the Minister of Natural Resources. It was a short meeting. She was, running to something else, which was to be expected. Probably two takeaways. She was forthright in saying that the Liberals have lost the messaging contest when it comes to the carbon tax. And she said, that's on me, but looking for help in terms of turning that around, and hoping that faith communities can have a role there. And second, she was really clear that the Liberal government will meet their 2050 target, but also real clear that, they're working hard to do that. So they're not going to be committing to anything earlier. So our 2040 ask didn't feel like something that she was going to commit to at all. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Sister Sue. Okay, next group. So I can click this slide. I'll ask Janet, Sister Janet, if you'd be willing to say a few things.
Yeah. Well, as has been said, on the Wednesday, we had a training session led by Genevieve. And I have to just say that Genevieve prepared some excellent materials for us to consider. And as well as, looking at the training for how we would approach the MPs, etc. She also gave us a lot of useful tips for etiquette for being on the Hill. And there were a lot of things that we needed to adhere to. So our team was made up of myself. I'm from Toronto, CSJ, Sister of St. Joseph, and Sabrina Shafari was with us. She works for our congregation as a creation care animator in our ministry for social justice, peace, and creation care. And then Genevieve was with us, as many of you know her, and Margot Ricci, who's on the leadership team of the In Canada Sisters of St. Joseph. And Margot is from London. So our first meeting was with Damien Kurek. He is a Conservative MP from Alberta. Young man in his blue jeans and his cowboy boots. So we were impressed just that he agreed to meet with us. And he actually gave us a fair amount of time. He didn't rush us. And so I think the main questions that we were asking him was when were the Conservatives going to unveil their climate change policy? And he was extremely vague. And, was sort of saying, well, it'll be before the next federal election. And I tried to remind him that, that the people are very skeptical of election promises. So it might be better if they gave us something sooner than later. So the second visit was with Joanne Thompson, and Joanne Thompson is from St. John's, Newfoundland. And all of these people are on the environment committees in their respective parties. And we had a really good a talk with Joanne, a little time limited, as she did have some, she was going to a vote on something quite soon after we met with her. So Joanne, first of all, is very familiar with religious congregations, as she's done work in healthcare with the Sisters of Mercy in Newfoundland. And she's very aware of needing to, instead of having one kind of big major goal, like to sort of break it down into smaller goals so that it's not just more achievable, but also doesn't create so much fear and anxiety in people. What was interesting about her is that, because one of our concerns was whether or not the parties could start to work across party lines for this whole effort around climate change and what we need to do around climate change. And, whereas Damien Kurek he's a member of the opposition, and so they oppose everything, including the carbon tax and initiatives, etc. She was very open and kind of favored having some cross-party intersectional conversations. And so that was very encouraging to hear that. So our third party was with Senator Rosa Galvez, and I think she was the highlight of our day. And she's a feisty Peruvian lady, and she represents Quebec. And she's one of Canada's leading experts in pollution control, I've learned, and its impact on human health. So she has put forward a white paper called Aligning Canadian Finance with Climate Commitments. And the whole issue there is how to get financial institutions, private, public, the banks and other institutions that regulate finance, how to get them to align their finances with climate change action. And that's kind of tricky because the banks here in Canada are one of the largest financial supporters for fossil fuels. So that's kind of a whole issue there. But anyway, we got invited to a breakfast that morning because she was presenting her paper, and that was really a highlight for us. We had an excellent panel. There was one conservative in the room, so that was encouraging. And Catherine McKenna, the former Minister of Environment, spoke. Another feisty lady, and she just kind of, put it out there and called a spade in terms of what was needed for climate action. So it was just a very enriching day. And one of my takeaways is I was just impressed with the number of young people that I was seeing in positions and involved in political activity. I just thought that was really hopeful, and that really, regardless of party lines, I thought that was great, and also appreciated the time and dedication that all of these people are giving for the sake of us and for the sake of our country. So, okay.
Thank you, Sister Janet. Another thing that we were able to do is I know that Group 1 spent a bit of time in the Senate, and Group 2 spent a little bit of time in the House. And that was an opportunity to see what was up. I don't know if Margot wants to mention who we were able. It's unusual to arrive at the House and actually be there for something interesting. So maybe Sister Margaret, you could mention, Margot, sorry, you could mention what we heard.
Yeah, well, it was so synchronistic. We stayed for about half an hour in the House. And during that time, the two MPs from London, MPs from London, MPs from London were speaking, Ariel Kayabaga and Lindsay Matheson. And the whole question was safe injection sites and the opposition to safe injection sites, and which has been a raging controversy throughout the country, but also here in London, it's been a very big deal. And it was fascinating to hear them mentioning people that we know and being so articulate about that. So it felt like that was a highlight of the day too, just to have hit that particular half hour with them.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll open the floor too if Sabrina or anybody else wants to chime in who participated on the Hill, if we missed anything in our little recap before we get into the group questions.
Can I just add about the importance of relationship here? And I saw it happening in all the meetings that we were at, with Damien Currick, for example, from Alberta, just trying to establish a connection, which could lead to further conversations. And it was great, as Janet mentioned, that with Joanne Thompson, she knows the Sisters of Mercy, has worked with them. Rosa Galvez from Peru. We talked about having sisters in Chincha and Coyote, and she knew obviously she knew the areas, but somehow that cemented, kind of the purpose for which we were there. I think it gave us an in.
I would only add that there was a genuine willingness to listen, even if the individuals we were speaking to, even if this was not their forte. And in the case of MP Currick, we were actually also able to leave him with a copy of Laudato Si, as Christian theology is an interest of his as well. So who knows where that could go? Maybe it'll collect dust on a shelf. Maybe he may actually pick it up and read it. So to echo what has already been said, that idea of relationship building and that willingness to listen.
Thank you, Sabrina. Okay, my cat's approaching my computer and just hit the slide for the next question, so we'll go with that. I've got 3 sets of questions for us today, and the first and the third we'll do as a group, and then the second one I'll ask for folks who participate on the Hill. But the first one is a little bit about the brass tacks. How did the 3-part learning series work for us? And for us, everyone is on the call, folks in the expanded ORCIE, JPIC, JEM community, as well as the learning series work for the people who were in the Hill meetings. Just to remember, we scheduled it in such a way we knew, and I can tell you from the planning committee, we're like, how do we do this? We want to have certain trainings and how to make time for travel, but also make time for reflection. So having the information sessions on the Monday, 2 of them, the C and the DISCERN. And then Tuesday was the travel day. Wednesday was the in-person afternoon training and fellowship. And then Thursday was the Hill meetings. So that was one question. How did that series kind of work for us as a model? And then the second part, how can we engage more religious JPIC staff, but mostly religious, in future lobby days? So those are 2 questions that I would really open it up to the whole group. And I'll invite you to raise your hand, ideally with the raise hand function, so we can see you, and just really to share your perspectives on this. That would be great. Now get someone up. Let's see, Ruba, go Ruba.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think the structure worked really well in terms of the 3-part learning series. I really appreciated the kind of wider audience, because I think that'll help us in the future as well. You know, for folks who maybe weren't able to make it to the in-person lobbying days, but I think it was very galvanizing to do that first part, so that when we do this again, I think folks will probably feel more comfortable even being able to approach it. But yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. And then I think I'm going to actually, because I have the slide up, I need someone else to keep track of who's going to speak next.
I can do that. So yeah, Joan has her hand up.
Okay, just a few comments. I think the input at the beginning of the week, those 2 webinars, I think they were really, really good, and I think they galvanized both the topics, and I think they helped shape some thinking about how we will ask for things when we actually got to the Hill, and so depending what we do next, not every lobby effort might be organized in this way, but I found that really, really helpful. And then when we actually got to the organizing of ourselves, when we got to the Hill, that afternoon session that Jen led was very good, and the materials that she had prepared helped us stay on topic and on track. So that's I think really important.
Thanks, Joan. And I guess I can only see people who put their hands up with the function as well. So please use the reactions button and then the raise hand if you have a question or want to share.
I would say I'll just jump in because I myself don't see anyone with their raised hand function, and say that we did have a very idyllic week in that nobody's travel plans were delayed greatly. We had lovely, mild, sunny weather in Ottawa. None of the appointments that we made were changed at the last minute necessarily. I know on the Wednesday there were some modifications, but by the time Thursday came along, everything ran tickety-boo as far as I could tell. And so that goes a long way in saying that the experience went super well because we didn't have those other sort of nitpicky logistics that just come along to sometimes take things over. But that said, the Monday sessions, as Sister Joan said, were a really good preface to the conversations that we were then going to have with the MPs. There was a sense of going into those meetings with up-to-date information, relevant information, particularly speaking to Senator Galvez and the CAFA bill that she has. So as a model, it's one that I think worked well, even though it sounds like it took up a lot of time in terms of things happening over the course of the week. Ultimately, it was a very efficient way to approach this, and I think future lobby days could be modeled after this as well. The small groups also worked. I'm not sure it would have done as smoothly if we had, let's say, 20 people with us. A few more would have been good, but with the numbers that we had, it seems like a good package deal. And then I see hands. I'm just gonna pop in. I see Darlene and Pat and Susan.
Team effort. Yeah, and all I'm going to say is, you know, because many of us who maybe could have been there in person, but had other commitments, you know, we're happy to see what was happening in person on the ground. But we did, I think, at some point talk about the possibility of us going to our constituencies if we can't be in Ottawa, to meet with our MPs locally, and maybe the opportunity for Jen to share some of those pointers that were shared at the in-person session more broadly, or do a webinar with folks on that might be really helpful for that purpose.
Great idea. Thank you.
Go ahead, Patricia.
And I just wanted to say how much I appreciated the fact that the sessions were recorded. And it just made it so much easier to be able to share with other people who would be interested in what's happening in Canada. Just help to educate people. It's just, this is a wonderful way to raise awareness and motivate people to act.
Great. I just wanted to say that I thought it was a rather excellent model for progressive learning. I learned a lot over the course of the week. And so I think, you know, sharing it with the webinars with the larger group was really great. And then you've got a smaller group that perhaps can even physically go to Ottawa. You know, not everybody can get to Ottawa. I agree, though, that it might be nice if Genevieve was able to do another webinar on some of the material that she actually shared with us in preparation, so that if people did go to their MPs, we'd all be on the same page. And I think there would be strength in that. I just wanted to say too about building relationships. We built relationships among us, and that was kind of nice to have that time to get to know people a little bit better. And Joe Gunn invited us for dinner at his place for homemade lasagna, and we had quite a wonderful evening at his place. So I would say that's also part of the relationship building that was really important.
Thank you. Christine, go ahead.
Morning. As someone who wasn't able to go this time, seeing how the process worked and having heard such wonderful input, and I felt like, wow, I'm updated now on the questions, and kind of seeing how much other input and sharing and helpfulness was going on. I feel very much inclined to hope that I'll be able to go join the group next time this happens.
Great, Christine. That leads us to the next question. So when we put together this day, we did it on a fairly short timeline. And so it was mostly to make sure that we could meet with MPs on the Hill. So it was limited by the time of the year and what's happening on the Hill at this time of year before the end of the House sits. But it also was at the same time as the JPIC Atlantic crew was meeting. So we tried to be clear that this was a pilot project that really only allowed for the participation of people in the kind of Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa circle. And that if we do it again, we would like to do it with more time, like more planning ahead, so that folks could participate from further away, either by traveling to Ottawa for the in-Hill meetings or doing, as Darlene said, picking up, step 3 in their local area with MPs when they're back in their constituencies. So along those lines, and following what Christine said, how can we engage more religious in future lobby days? We talked a bit about this is a pilot project, so we very loosely said, could we do this in September? September's, again, a loose time, as in like the next season being fall. So it could be later in fall. And it will depend a bit on what's happening in the House of Commons or in the Senate. But what can we do to have more religious or participating?
Go ahead.
I just have a question. You say engage more religious, but would it be acceptable to extend that to associates of the religious congregations? Because, obviously they're connected to the congregations, and just a question.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. And we did that with Deirdre Pike joined on behalf of the School Sisters. And she's an associate. Now Deirdre is like a bit of a political animal. So she loves this stuff and was happy to jump right into it. But it did bring up the idea that it doesn't need to be limited to religious, but we might consider associates as well. I know, so other than timing, like having a good heads up, the other thing that the way we did the week, it would avoid, let me say, for example, if I wanted Peter Beeson to join the next lobby days, he might not be able to block off, 4 days off of the week, but he could join, he's already in Ottawa, is my point. He could participate in the Monday events and then jump in on kind of Wednesday afternoon and Thursday, so that people who are closer to Ottawa wouldn't have to block the travel, like to do everything in person. I say that because we'd also thought about, okay, maybe fly, get everybody in town and then do the 1, 2, 3. But I think I really like the way we set it up. And the travel was in the middle, which at least for me, it also meant that we could kind of almost reevaluate or reabsorb some of our initial plans for the week based on kind of what we were learning. Not massive changes, but we were able to tweak it somewhat. So I liked having that time to kind of absorb while folks were traveling.
Maybe I'll jump in here. It's Joan. Certainly associates or other people that we're working with on issues, I think it would be good if there is an interest that they could join us both in the learning and in the lobbying efforts. The other thing I think is important is, and this can be done more informally than a formal session, but when we come back and we're with our communities or those other organizations we're working with, to talk about these efforts around lobbying. There's a lot of cynicism out there, and I carry a healthy dose within myself around politicians and our political systems. But I think that notion of building relationships, start talking about this in a helpful way, helps our members, our colleagues understand that we do have something to contribute. We do have something to learn from the people who represent a different perspective. And I think that can go a long way. And Mostly our members in religious communities, the notion of lobbying sounds like a dangerous clandestine activity that we're engaged in. And I think the more we can normalize conversations with our political colleagues and friends, and I think it helps. It goes a long, long way, because they don't know. They know some of the steps to move things through the political process, whether it's at the provincial level, the city level, or the national level. But we need to see them as colleagues trying to create a better environment for all of us. And so the more we engage in these conversations and share our experience of being on the Hill, that can be helpful.
Mhm.
Thank you, Joan. Ruva, go right ahead.
I think the one of the biggest factors that I saw was just lead time in terms of scheduling. I know for Sisters of the Concrete, it's just the travel is often what's it called, planned so far ahead of time that by the time, you know, I told people about this, they were, you know, booked beyond it quite a bit. But I also know that it can be difficult in terms of planning for us with getting those meetings. So I guess finding that balance, and maybe even when we have a day in mind that we know people are on the Hill, but we don't necessarily have the meeting set up yet, and sending out that as a save the date beforehand might help in terms of having people be like, oh, already free, if maybe, yeah, we have like 2 days saved to be like, and they can plan the travel to Ottawa while we're still arranging meetings, that kind of thing. And I was also, I think, struck by what Janet was saying about building relationship among like the different members of different congregations, because I think that can go a long way in making members feel comfortable in engaging with something like that. And the solidarity, we're not doing it alone aspect, I think would also really help in terms of engaging more religious in this work.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, just actually jumping back to the evaluation, Genevieve, I think we did talk about this, the need for the people on the Hill to actually meet after the day to have our own debriefing would be really helpful. So just so that doesn't get lost. I'm also thinking too, it would be nice if we are able to encourage members of congregations, whether they're associates or lay members or whatever, to lobby in their own jurisdictions, if it would be possible to sort of collect some of that information and share it with the group, so that, you know, we all know that what we're doing, you know, give us that sense of like, this is what we are doing as a group. This is the impact that we think we're making. And Genevieve gave us, you won't see it, but it was a form that we filled out for each of the meetings that we had. And, you know, it has simple things like notes from the meeting, other notes, follow-ups. I'd like to add on that, Genevieve, something like impact, you know, like, was there an impact with this, or a decision, or something, was there any kind of concrete shifting or movement within that meeting, so that we kind of capture what might be actually happening that can then be built on. So.
Thank you, Janet. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. I really appreciate the whole effort not only of religious getting together to do lobbying, but also the training. I was in that part of the first session. I really appreciate the training and the effort being made to do this training. So it's not just a question of specialized staff doing the lobbying, but the skills and the commitment and the interest gets socialized among religious. I think that's that's very healthy. It's good for relations among us, and I think it's probably will help with persistence over time. I just want to underline too I guess the novelty and the importance of what we're doing through ORCIE. The churches, the Christian churches in Canada are weak at lobbying, and it probably so that the religious are doing something, I think, is very significant for the faith voices. And I think that lack is probably related to something that what Joan said a minute ago about fear of being too political and so on and so forth. So it's also important that we normalize lobbying and see politicians as our brothers and sisters. We may not necessarily like them all the time, but at least trust in their goodwill. In terms of relationships, the staff, the parliamentary staff people are also important. They change a lot, but it tends to be the same group, I think, that churns around. So someone might be with one minister, this year, and then in 2 years they're with another minister, but they're still part of the group of staffers. So it's important to build relations with the staff, many of whom are young, I think. Yeah, so thank you very much for this. I think this is a huge step forward for religious in Canada and for social justice, faith-based social justice.
I'll tell you a little, I don't think there's anyone waiting to speak. I'll tell you a little thing that helped get the meeting. So when I was meeting with some of these folks with Nature Canada, most of the groups, it was like one of them would be like, I'm working on protecting the butterflies in the Guelph area. And then another group, and then I had to say who I was. And I was like, man, I really like the Office for Religious Congregations for Integral Ecology is really different title from butterflies in Guelph. And so I developed a little bit of a thing that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but my objective in those meetings with Nature Canada was to be remembered by the MPs. And so I told them that I was a lobbyist for radical nuns who wanted to see Pope Francis's message of integral ecology go further. And every single person who I met with then opened the door for this next meeting. And the sisters, many of them were like, I don't know if I would go with radical nuns as an identifier, which is fair, but my job was to get us in the door. So I name that because we need associates and JPIC staffers there, but to go back with what Peter says, all of those MPs wanted to meet the radical nuns. I'm aware we're more than just radical nuns, but I needed to help people understand what we were doing and what we were about in a way that was quick and interesting and open the door, right? Because that's what we're afraid of. So sometimes that's an interesting thing to share. Go ahead, Sister Sue.
Thanks, Jen. And you just reminded me that one of my takeaways from the day was that we need to develop a stronger and punchier 2-minute description of ORCIE.
Yeah.
And so that will be one of our tasks as we move on from this, is to get something really punchy. Maybe not the radical nuns, but something.
I was like, I've got something punchy, Sue. It's whether you as the funders agree with how I present you.
And it just further to Jen's point, it did stick. Senator Rona Galvez, as Jen shared the tweet, actually put out on her page, meeting with these radical nuns. It included myself and Jen, but that's okay. So it did obviously stick.
Barbara, go ahead.
It
Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. And again, I thank you for the whole process that we have engaged in thoroughly. I know there are 8 of us in our group, and we assume that our, whether you're sisters or laity or whoever, we assume that we are together. I never thought of asking a question of whether we could. So we are together as one. And I would like to see that we have something the size of the business card with the significant points of ORCIE, and that we at least give each other the online so that we can print our own for ORCIE little business cards to hand out broadly among our people in each area, and for those in politics as well. But something that's catchy. And again, I never liked the term nuns, nor am I a school sister like that. I mean, I don't like those terms. But if that works, then we can go. You know, we're Notre Dame. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to jump us into the next question. I'll share the screen for the questions and then I'll turn the screen off. All right, okay, sharing my screen. I work on 2 screens, so sometimes it can be a bit confusing. Here we go. This was the questions for On the Hill. What did we learn about where MPs stand on increased action to address climate change? And what did we learn about being effective change agents? So here we went in with a couple asks about an increased action and more urgent action on climate change. How did the MPs or whoever we met take that? And in terms of general effective change agents, some of that came in the last session, the last question about relationships and about the training, so that it's not a specialized staff situation. I will stop the share. So this second piece, and we've heard a little bit from the folks who participated on the Hill, but it would be the same. Is there anything that we haven't said yet that you could speak to about how our request came forward, Joan?
I don't think anybody we met with didn't recognize that climate change has an urgency about it. However, it contains multiple pieces and parts of it, and they all seem to acknowledge, at least the MPs that I met with. And then some of them gave some local examples. For instance, when we met with Philomena Tassi from Hamilton, she talked about the steel industry in Hamilton, the green steel efforts that they are making there. So they're very aware that positions affect locally. And she said that she would send us some more information exactly about what they're doing. I think those are the benefits of these relationships, that we're learning about stuff that maybe I never would bump into or be a tag on or a footnote in something else that I might be reading. So I think that, and they engaged us even if they didn't agree with us or that we didn't agree with them. I mean, Elizabeth May thought we should all be in the churches preaching the message of Laudato Si, and so we said thank you. And but that's the kind of stuff that where people are coming from, and those are if those relationships are going to be on the one meeting, they are opening sometimes for other conversations. So And we also, sorry, we also talked about, you know, keeping the conversation going, you know, beyond this, you know, half hour or hour encounter that we had on the Hill. Many of these are people that we might meet at other events, and to remind that. So it is about relationship building, and then secondly, the sharing of ideas, because that's what will move us forward, I think.
In Sister Janet, I think, mentioned the reporting form. And everybody fills in a report differently about MPs, but there's always nuggets of what's next. So for, there's always, you know, they'll mention, oh, you should also talk to so-and-so. You know, this conservative senator is in Quebec and has started to become more open to the environmental message. So I always find it, there's always little crumbs in the meeting that allows you to go further. They might not have the biggest impact, but it's at least, and that's something, you know, we ask them to bring it to the Conservative Caucus, which they sometimes do, but it's also, who else should we be talking to? And so even that relationship can send us on the next one. So that's something that I really appreciate, being able to pull out those little pieces.
I'd just like to say too that it's an invitation for us to listen, because I think we need to set aside our own personal biases. So like when we met with Damian Couric, you know, he's a conservative, and so he is opposed to a lot of the liberal initiatives, even though the liberals aren't really getting any action on them either, you know. But one of the things he brought up was this whole impact of, you know, if we start to really change the economics within the global picture, how is that going to impact food, the whole food cycle, like for us here at home, but also for global partners who really depend upon sending us their oranges and their grapefruits and whatever. So, I mean, that's, as Joan says, there are so many pieces to this. And so I think that it's really important that we listen to what's being said, even with folks that perhaps we don't agree with, or, you know, we're on a different page, because there may be some very valid considerations to bring, you know, to the whole picture.
Excellent. Thanks, Janet.
I think the other thing to think about as well is regardless of who's in government, we have to work with them. So maybe in the next election, we'll have a conservative government. It'd be a good thing to have some of those relationships built in that case, and to really be able to communicate with those folks. So, you know, we operate with that understanding that we work with whoever's in government, because really the ultimate goal is that we have the policy pieces that we care about shared with everyone.
Yeah, we were pretty excited that we got to meet with, we can say that we met with MPs from 3 parties and senators, because you don't always get, it doesn't always work. But that was pretty exciting for us, because that's what we mean to be doing. It's not just whoever's in power currently, but from across the board. That's one of the primary focuses of ORCIE, is that dialogue.
And I think, just for further context, in terms of humanizing and personalizing these people in these positions of representation, in the case of MP Couric, his aide afterwards revealed he's also a volunteer firefighter when he goes back out to Alberta. So you can only imagine the time that we left Ottawa, what he may have been leaving Ottawa to do, to go back home to Alberta to do. And he is a farmer, which is part of what made him amenable to these messages around environmental issues. And that's why he was tuned into, as Sister Janet was saying, these sort of food supply issues. So humanizing these individuals and finding where their lanes of interest are made it very easy to have those conversations, and made it very easy, as Darlene is saying, to want to build those relationships a bit more firmly and have them in place should other things happen.
Barbara.
And I just want to add that I deeply appreciate your expertise and leadership. And also, I think it might help if we can just raise up or emphasize, add an achievement of any of the parliamentarians as we go along, something that they have contributed as we go, and that we say that to people to help people know that there are some promises kept. There are attempts being made. So that could help for everybody we meet to stress achievements, contributions, even if it's not in Ottawa, but in their own regions. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to jump us to our next question. And let's see if I can share back on my two screen. Oh, no.
Can I just say, Genevieve, can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
As from that last comment, when we met with Joanne, one of the things that she said in her talk was, we have made some achievements, and she, in the whole thing of climate change, and she named them. I don't have them in my head at the immediate moment, but I thought that was actually very good to recognize that. And I think maybe we need to also acknowledge that, we're not, everything is not going backwards. There are some steps. There may not be fast enough or urgent enough, but I think to kind of bring it into kind of a both and conversation rather than an either or conversation is really helpful.
Absolutely. That is an important piece for driving change of both and. Priscilla Solomon once took me aside and gave me a good talking to about my either or reality that needed to shift to a both and. So I'll never forget that. Okay, let me see if I can share my screen again for the last series of questions. We've got, what climate action campaigns can we continue to bring forward? And ideas for future ORCIE lobby days. So this one, I think it's more of that first one. What climate action campaigns can we continue to bring forward? And both Darlene and I will mention two ideas that have been floated recently, because this is really came out of energy from our sessions with JEM, the sessions with the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, the Stop Ecocide presentations. So these different campaigns on climate action, and what's the next one for us as JEM going forward. So I'll pass it to Darlene to talk about the first, if that's okay. And then I'll mention the second.
Yeah, sure. And if you remember the first session we had on May 15th with Hadrian and Carolyn, we did have a chance to raise the issue of the next climate COP. So the next conference of parties on climate change that'll take place in November is going to be COP28, which is going to be held in United Arab Emirates which you might refer to as a petrostate. It is a gas producing state, and the president of the next COP is an executive of a oil and gas company based there. So, you know, we had a chance to raise the question about what do you do in that kind of circumstance? Do you boycott, or do you have a presence there? Just how do you respond to that? So one of the things that has emerged in the last little while is that in the US anyway, and I think elsewhere, several political officials have been writing to call for the president of the COP to step down, given that he is in quite a conflict of interest position, and quite contrary to the goals of the climate conferences. So we kind of played around with the idea of possibly having some kind of action around that here in Canada that ORCIE could lead. And that might just involve drafting a letter that could be signed on to and circulated to get support ahead of, quite a bit ahead of COP28 to show our concern for sure about the presidency of the coming COP. So that was one thing that we thought we might pursue. Again, it's a matter of making sure there's time and the ability to get the support needed for that, but it is something we're floating around.
Okay, the other one is what you may have heard us. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Should be able to see it. So what I mentioned, what we've seen a little bit more of in recent years in the House, in particular with the Liberal government, is for legislation that begins in the Senate, goes to committee in the Senate, and then goes to the House. So we're used to a model where it goes from the House of Commons to committee, and then debate in the House of Commons, and then Senate for kind of the last review. But there's been this shift that there would be work happening in both houses, and that's a desire to do the work in committee, the review, to move things forward. Regardless, this is climate aligned finance. It's a legislative bill through the Senate that is gaining momentum. It's not going to be brought to the House this summer, maybe not even this sitting, but the importance of it is that it's calling on the government to use everything that it has at its disposal, every legislative and regulatory tool, to align the financial system with the Paris Agreement. There's been over 120 organizations and individuals who have signed on. JEM has endorsed this bill. Sisters of St. Joseph, Feds have signed on. Is it the Feds? Well, I don't know what to call them. But the Office of Systemic Justice has signed on.
Federation.
The
of St. Joseph.
The Feds of the Sisters have joined on. ORCIE has signed on. And so, and this came about, they've got about 120 in groups and organizations have signed on, and they did another round of endorsements. And then through our promotion, we've also seen Kairos sign on and Citizens for Public Justice sign on. I sent it around as well to a few of the other folks, the United Church, the Anglican Church, so that they're aware of it. But this is a piece that we might consider inviting other congregations to learn about and possibly endorse. Each congregation could. But what it's doing is it's kind of gaining momentum and showing showing elected leaders that we're serious about using every tool we have, all the legislative and regulatory tools. And the subtext to it, for me, or the way I see it, the subtext is that you have to regulate climate action. It's not up to the market. It's not up to capitalism. You have to use all the legislative and regulatory tools you can. So just getting that clear for people. So that's another idea, is to perhaps prepare a note as JEM about CAFA, like a kind of recommendation that we could send around to different congregations.
Yes. Yes.
So those are two ideas. Janet, want to jump in?
Yeah, I think the idea of having people endorse CAFA is great, the wider that is. What struck me about Senator Rosa was that she told us quite directly that you don't write petitions to the Senate, you write letters. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting in terms of, you know, how some initiatives might get forwarded, so.
Yeah, it's kind of new territory with this type of legislation beginning in the Senate, but how can we support it going forward? It's a big question.
I think another piece that could be looked at is circling back to issues that we're hoping people will follow up on. So what I mean by that, you know, as a nation, Canada has a track record of committing to things and then just sort of not following through on them. So figuring out a way that is, as I'm going to call it, capacity friendly, to gently circle back on commitments made on things with those elected representatives to say, hey, are we on track to be doing this? If we're not on track to be doing this, what should we be doing? What should we be asking for? And that could be sort of like a standing item sort of thing for engagement, to keep that attention there, as, you know, the whole squeaky wheel thing. Hey, maybe you could brand yourselves as the squeaky wheels. Anyways, so that is to say, just following through on, you know, gentle reminders to circle back on commitments that have been made.
Just go ahead, Mr. Morrow.
Well, just the other thing on CAFA, one of the panelists that morning at the breakfast was Roger Beauchemin, who is the head of Addenda Capital, which interestingly was just a new investment manager that we have engaged. We mentioned the whole event at our last investment meeting to our investment consultant. And of course, he knows Roger Beauchemin. And but it's just to get that group of people also interested in what's going on there. And when he does come, the Addenda person, and he himself won't come, but somebody will come, to talk about it at that level also is helpful.
Yeah. Good idea. So I'll mention in terms of timing, what we're doing here is our kind of evaluation from our learning and lobbying event, and these kind of next steps for ORCIE, not ORCIE, but JEM. And keep in mind that we're getting into the summer. So this is not like tomorrow, okay, go. This is kind of next steps that we would be leading into the fall, to name that we're into a quieter summer. As well, because right now anything in the house is, they call it silly season, where the liberals, or regardless of the liberals, are going to try to push things forward, and the conservatives are going to try to delay with a whole bunch of ridiculous tactics. So we're about to see, I was going to say some interesting adjectives. We're about to see some interesting times in the house in the coming 2 weeks. But this is kind of building up on what's next, so that we're maintaining a continuum with what we're doing around climate action.
Peter, go ahead.
Another thing to keep in mind for future agenda items is just the whole question of extractivism in the Canadian North and the boreal zone, which is going to become more and more of an issue as economies try to go into green technology, and that will lead to conflicts and sometimes collaborations with First Nations. So there'll be a growing intersection of Indigenous solidarity, extractivism issues, and integral ecology issues. I don't know of a focus in Canada that brings together those energies yet, but there's certainly lots of scattered initiatives, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, so what I've heard here is that there's energy, and just to say that, I'll say on the COP28 presidency, this is a piece that we've already, we signed on to a letter a little while, ORCIE signed on to a letter a little while ago, and the COP28 presidency is going to become really hot again in September, when people are kind of preparing for, do we go to the climate conference, do we participate, and the whole debate of around that. And I think there'll be some, I think actually we have an important role to play in that, in reminding folks that any space where our partners in the Global South participate, we need to be building up at the same time, recognizing that corporate greenwashing is not an acceptable way for us to move forward. So there's that, and then as well, an endorsement letter recommended by JEM for CAFA. So how does it sound if we work on an endorsement letter kind of recommended by JEM that could be circulated, and that could be worked by anybody here who wants to help? We can work on that over the summer so that it would be circulated kind of once people pick things up in the return from a quieter summer. And then in future discussions, we look at our commitments and also about extractivism. That's what I heard for next steps.
Jen, excuse me. Can you just explain to me what is the relationship between JEM and ORCIE? So
That
like
is a
JEM
great question.
is putting forward these letters, petitions, etc. So where does ORCIE come into all of this?
Who I'm like, who on this squares does the best job of explaining the difference between them?
So I don't know if it's so much about explaining the difference as that we are charting a path forward where we are collaborating in really beneficial ways. So JEM has long been a location for us to come together and do some learning with some action, and that continues. I think ORCIE is very well placed to make sure that the action that comes out of any JEM initiatives is a strong political advocacy effort. So I mean, we're charting a path forward. I think we are finding it quite vibrant and productive at this point. But I wouldn't want to, narrow it down to it's this and not that.
When we were on the Hill, that's why I was just like radical nuns and their friends, the priests.
Yeah, Joe was a little uncomfortable being called a radical nun, but
I mean it in the most, like, to me, that is the highest level, being a radical nun. I could only dream of being a radical nun. That's the energy with which I look at Margot's got to. But that's the energy I bring to it, and that's what's exciting, because it's an exciting energy around action on integral ecology, and that's what we're kind of leaning into. I like that, Sister Sue, charting a path forward.
Yeah, well done.
Awesome. Okay, maybe I'll pass it to Darlene to close us.
Well, my goodness, thank you all so much. I feel like I learned a lot from everyone who participated, and your questions and recommendations were so very helpful. I feel like this was a really big success, our first effort at our learning and lobbying, and we'll take our lessons forward to our next sessions, and please do be part of that with us. we'll be sending out follow-ups from what we've learned and heard here today in the coming weeks. And we do know that summer is upon us, so it's a busy time until it's not a busy time, and then it's a busy time again. But we'll be in touch to follow up on these pieces. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jen, for your leadership on this, and all of you folks who engaged in the lobbying. And please do stay tuned for more wonderful things to come. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.